too many interruptions, it'll be okay. But if I go, I'll make sure to come back as soon as I can, or I might need to kind of move somewhere where I get better internet access. So hopefully, touch wood, we won't have any issues. But yeah, I'm here today to talk to you about kind of the top tips on interviewing from somebody who's done hundreds, and I wanted to say thousands, but I was like, it might just be slightly under 1,000. So I won't go that far, but I've definitely done hundreds. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and get my little next screen up. So just a short intro from me. I'm Jodie. I'm the talent acquisition manager here at OVO, but this is kind of what my journey has been. Just so you're aware, as Conway said, I haven't always been in the energy industry. So when I was putting this together, I realised I actually left university in 2014, which was 10 years ago, which made me realise how much older I am now. So didn't enjoy putting that one together, but I've been in the world of work for 10 years, and I've had it's not been varied in a sense, because I've always been in some sort of kind of people HR role, but I've worked for very, very different companies. So when I left university, I went into a company called Catley. They're this huge outsourcer, and I worked in their military recruiting contract, which is why I've got kind of the army logo there. I didn't work in the people team and HR initially. I was on a 6-month fixed term contract doing some kind of project admin support. So it was quite kind of admin heavy. Then there was an opportunity to move into more of like a people recruitment focused role, where I got the opportunity to get involved in lots of different projects. It was around hiring recruiters to recruit people into the army. So that was a very interesting experience. I was up and down the country for a year and a half or so, up to like Leeds, Sheffield, Manchester, Scotland, down south in Cornwall as well. So I got to go to Sandhurst. I don't know if anyone knows anything about the army, but went to where they train the kind of army officers. That was pretty cool. Got to see all of that. So it was a really interesting role. But I felt like, oh, I've got a hand raised. Yeah, if you want to ask your question now, happy to answer it, but also happy to answer any questions at the end. Oh no, hand down. So that was really interesting. But then I decided that I didn't really want to be there, because it was in the middle of nowhere. It was very much close to home. The people I worked with weren't really the kind of people I wanted to keep working with. It was very kind of different to the demographic of people I wanted to work with. It was very much kind of older, male-dominated environment. So I decided to get out there, and I moved to London. So I went to London, and I worked for Expedia Group. So specifying in Expedia themselves, but also hotels.com. So I don't know if anyone likes traveling, but it's a great kind of travel tech company. It's very kind of progressive, forward thinking, and it opened my eyes to the world of kind of tech focused business. So that was very much in a recruiting role there, and I felt from there, right, I really love recruitment. And I wasn't looking for OVO. I wasn't looking to kind of move, but I'd moved away from home, and I decided really like to go home at some point. I thought I was going to be in London maybe kind of 2-3 years. I was only there a year, and then a role at OVO came up, and I was like, you know what, I'm not going to leave Expedia for just anything. And when I saw more about OVO, I was like, actually, this is really cool. They're doing some great stuff within the energy sector. Did I think I was going to work in the energy sector when I was growing up? No, if I'm totally honest, because I didn't think all of the energy companies out there were like OVO. But OVO is kind of a lot more progressive. We're all about Plan Zero, kind of decarbonising people's homes and kind of building it, bringing everyone on this journey to a greener future. So I was like, you know what, that's great. That's exactly the kind of place I want to be. They've got a great mission. They're trying to make a real difference in the world. And they've got a really kind of progressive, forward-thinking culture, which is the only thing I was going to leave Expedia for. So, and that was 5 years ago now, 5.5 years ago. So I started out at OVO, and I've been in the recruitment team ever since, but kind of moved my way up through the ranks, and now I'm kind of one of the team managers here, which is really great opportunity. And beyond kind of the interviewing piece, I mean, I've interviewed for pretty much every role under the sun. I think the only roles that I haven't done so far are software engineers and kind of the tech space, because we've had quite a segregated team at times, where we've kind of focused like a tech focused team and a non-tech focused team, but we're a lot more flexible now. So I think tech is the only area of the business that I haven't hired for, but done smart meters, customer service, kind of product, finance, data, HR, so everything. So hopefully I'll be able to give you some good tips in a bit. So what I'm going to go into next is I'll speak a bit more around kind of where to find jobs. It might be teaching you to suck eggs a little bit, but there's some really good places to look out there if you don't kind of necessarily know what you're looking for. So there's way more job boards available than this, but these are kind of the key ones that if I was looking for a role again, this is probably what I'd use. Otter in particular, we kind of work with Otter in our team, but it's a really great platform where you can kind of match yourselves. It's essentially a bit like Tinder for jobs. You can kind of swipe through, you can put your preferences and your profile, what you're looking for, what's important to you, and it will bring up matches for jobs that you want. But it's predominantly kind of with smaller, maybe kind of more progressive tech-focused companies, not necessarily energy companies, but I think the likes of Octopus are on there, we're on there. So it's always worth kind of looking on that. Glassdoor, Indeed, LinkedIn, they're kind of all the classic places that you probably kind of start looking for jobs. Glassdoor obviously also has the reviews piece, can tell you about what it's like working in certain businesses. You get kind of employee reviews, interviews, that sort of thing. And then some other job boards you might not have heard of is things like Cord. So Cord is a more tech focus, so kind of security or software engineering, that sort of thing. Diversifying is a brilliant job board, particularly focusing on bringing kind of diverse talent into the workplace. So that's a great one to look at. And then a company we've partnered with recently, particularly if you're interested in the energy industry, is a company called Greenworks. Again, it's one where you can kind of build your profile on there. You can find jobs that kind of match what you're looking for, but it's very much focused on the renewable energy space. So if you haven't heard of them, I'd recommend checking them out. And then another one that kind of, if I was looking for a role, I'd probably use would be Flexer. So Flexer are very much around like the flexible working piece. So I think as a workforce, we've shifted very much into kind of more of a hybrid, flexible way of working, and Flex's kind of main goal is around finding remote work for people, or if you want to be a bit more hybrid, maybe 1 or 2 days in the office. Flex's kind of key thing is about finding jobs and companies which have flexibility at their core. So that's kind of where to find roles. And then the only other things I've put on there are what if you're looking for a role, what could you do? So one of the things is definitely about leveraging your own network. So connect with different employers on LinkedIn. If you really like what certain companies are doing, follow them. If there's certain kind of teams that you're interested in, or you see people that you can connect with, it's always worth kind of sending a connection request and being like, hey, I'm really interested in what your company does. I know you might not have any roles at the moment, but would love to hear more, or please keep me in mind, that sort of thing. And also there's a feature on LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, I'd recommend getting on there. It's really good for kind of searching for jobs, but there's a feature where you can mark yourself as open to work. And a lot of recruiters in the background, we have a specific tool that we can use on LinkedIn where we can filter and we can search for people. And one of the main filters that we would use is people who are open to work. That's kind of predominantly where I'd start a search, is people who are actively looking. So if you are looking for a role and you are on LinkedIn and you haven't necessarily marked yourself as open to work on LinkedIn, I'd recommend doing that. You can just do a quick Google search on how to do it, and it will come up there, and it will hopefully kind of bring your profile further up in people's searches when they go on there. And then another one is recruitment agencies. Kind of as an internal recruiter, we do work with recruitment agencies. Us as a company are the ones who pay for them. So for you as a candidate, they would be free to use. So I think sometimes people look at recruitment agencies and are like, oh, is this a scam? Like, can these people actually help find a job for free? The answer is yes. As a candidate, you shouldn't have to pay for any of this. So you can find specific agencies out there who specify in whether it's industries, so energy industry. There's various different ones that we've worked with in the past who kind of got utility focused ones. There's an energy agency called Consult Energy. They focus very much on careers in the energy industry. And then you can have different disciplines as well. So you can have specific data focused agencies, or tech, or whatever it might be. So that's one to look at if you really want to kind of find a new role and get yourself in the job market. Then I would recommend kind of reaching out to recruitment agencies, because they have really extensive networks and sectors. They often get told about roles by companies before they're advertised, particularly companies where they've got really strong relationships built. So it's always worthwhile kind of signing up to one of those if you're interested and you're looking. So in terms of again, I'll get into the interview stuff in a minute, but I guess this is just setting yourself up for success. The stats we had earlier, you know, only 80% of applications kind of get rejected at initial CV review stage. So it's worth kind of building a really great CV that's going to help you get kind of stand out and get noticed. So in terms of the CV, and I can share these things afterwards, so you don't need to worry about writing them down too much, but you might have heard it before, but one of the key things, and I think when I was initially applying for jobs, I never really thought about it, and I was like, oh no, that's a bunch of rubbish, I won't do that, is tailoring your CV to the role. It's so clear, kind of being on the other side of the fence, it is really clear now when people don't, and they're just applying to literally anything and spamming roles. I mean, one of the roles I was hiring for earlier, or I was reviewing the applications for, it was for a really technical kind of Salesforce role, and the amount of people who applied for the role who had no experience in Salesforce was quite outstanding. So I would always recommend tailoring your CV. That doesn't mean you need to kind of spend hours and hours every time you're applying for a job building a new CV. I think you can create a really great kind of core template of the key information, like your name, your education, your personal information, and your general experience. But then beyond that, you can think about the bits that you need to tweak in order to help your CV stand out. So one of the things I'd recommend putting on there, kind of in your About Me section, would be like a highlights piece, and that's where you could really call out the relevant experience you've got. So for example, if it's a role where you need to work towards targets, maybe put an example you've reached or exceeded these in previous jobs. So on average, I achieved 9.6 on CSAT scores with 92% resolution. So you could do that sort of thing. So it's really important just to read through a job description when you're applying for a role, pick out the key kind of skills and experience they're looking for, and make sure that's reflected in your CV. So you can really kind of show easily, you know, if someone's only looking at your CV and they're going to make a decision in 90 seconds, you want to make sure when they're looking at it that you're going to stand out. So so put it really clearly, the key highlights which reflect what the company or the role you're applying for. Another thing is, with your experience, I see a lot of CVs where people put literally every job they've ever had, and half the time, especially earlier career jobs, they're not necessarily relevant. I think it's important to kind of make sure you can kind of cover your experience, but you don't have to go into as much detail. So if for example, I don't know, you worked in I worked in a bed and breakfast when I was younger, or I did kind of jobs at university, like working in a bar and things like that. I wouldn't necessarily put those on my CV. If I did kind of various admin jobs, like whether it was in my final year at university, I might just put them in as a very brief sentence, but I wouldn't necessarily kind of go into a lot of detail if it wasn't relevant to the role I'm applying for. So you can kind of cover the gaps timeline wise, and if you've kind of had career breaks and that sort of thing, it's important to kind of pop them on and just be like, look, this is when I wasn't working. But I think it's important to go into as much detail as you can in roles which are relevant and specific to the role you're applying for. So kind of calling out anything which is really relevant. So, and again, I think you'll have heard that, you know, you keep your CV to 2 pages. Anything more than 2 pages, honestly, I probably wouldn't look at. It's just, you need to be concise, you need to be clear, it needs to be informative, and it needs to be engaging as possible. So one of the things, I don't know how people make their CVs, but again, I see a lot of templates of people who've used really old school, like Microsoft Publisher, Word templates, and they're fine and they do the job. But I think this day and age, people are getting more and more creative with things. So a tool that I've used to create my CV in the past is a tool called Canva. They have some really kind of funky designs on there, with like pictures and graphics and stuff. But if you're not applying to a creative role, don't worry about putting anything too fancy or exciting. Just something clear and kind of bold that makes your CV stand out and is relevant, as I've said, to the role you're applying for. And there's no need to include a photo of yourself. There's no need to disclose how old you are or anything like that. It's very much just the key information, kind of key contact information, like phone, email address, and your name is all you need to pop on there when it comes to kind of details. So that's just a very basics of setting yourself up for success when it comes to the CV. And again, for the cover letter, I think a lot of companies nowadays, cover letters are optional. Some employers ask for them, some don't. Again, I think a cover letter is worthwhile doing. as long as you're not just regurgitating the information that's in your CV. I think the cover letter should differ from a CV. It needs to include, again, it needs to relate to the role you're applying for, relate to the company you're applying for, but it should focus more on the value you can add, not necessarily why you want the role. It's not kind of a pitch around, I really want this role because you've got great benefits, or I really believe in your mission, or whatever it is. It's about kind of what you can bring to the role specifically, the value you can add, and why they should hire you, essentially. Again, keep it short and sweet. Don't duplicate the information. And if there is an option to put a cover letter, I think it's always worth putting one on, because it provides a bit more flavour, it provides a bit more reasoning. And when someone has kind of 200 plus applications to go through, and they're all starting to kind of blur into one and look the same, people will, I would look at a cover letter if someone has put one, to kind of give me a bit more understanding of what the person is about. So I'd always recommend putting one. Again, you can make a template. You don't need to spend hours and hours every time you apply to a job, but just kind of keep it brief, and kind of have key points that you can take in and out depending on the job you're applying for. So that is the very basics of kind of applying to a job. And now I can get into the bit around the interviews. So as we saw in the stats there, first of all, when you've been invited to interview, that's great. You've got to that stage. Not everyone gets to that stage, so well done. You've been invited because on paper you have the right skills and experience to do the job. So remember that and think, give yourself a pat on the back. You've got this far. And when it comes to an interview, the purpose isn't to trip you up or trick you. As teams, we genuinely want people to perform their best. It's an opportunity for people to sell themselves and kind of show why they should be given the opportunity for the role. There's kind of 4 key points that I'd cover before going in an interview, and some of them might seem a bit basic and a bit simple, but you'd be surprised with how many questions we get about things, or you'd be surprised how many people don't necessarily do this, and it can make things a bit more difficult along the way. So number 1, sounds a bit simple, but confirm the basics. A lot of companies these days are doing virtual interviews, but some do still meet in person, and we have a mix of hybrid and in-person interviews. So it's always just worth checking that. Check the time, check the date, do kind of the basic housekeeping stuff before. So can you get onto the link? Do you need to create an account to get to the video, whatever it might be? Do you know how to get to the office? So it's worth, just for your own kind of benefit, it's worth taking time to just do that, whether it's 5 minutes, just to check you can get onto the relevant systems, so you're not kind of flustered and feel anxious and that sort of thing, just as you're about to go into your interview. Number 2 is confirm the type of interview and prepare. Different companies do very different interviews these days. Some people kind of really focus on the competency stuff. Some people have more of that initial conversation. Some people have tasks involved. So it's always worth asking your recruiter, what's this interview going to be like? And a lot of companies now, we ask within our application process, do you require any reasonable adjustments for the interview? So always be honest, kind of if you need extra time, if there's going to be a task, or if you need the question sent to you beforehand, you can always request this, and companies, any company worth their salt would be able to kind of make adjustments to the process and help accommodate that for you. So just confirm what you're going to do. And it depends on kind of where you are in the process, obviously, but it's always worth checking, and no recruiter would mind if you ask the question. We want people to do their best. We want you to be as prepared as possible. Number 3, think of questions. I think that's a really important one. And I really love it when people ask me questions, and not just the general questions like, I'm just trying to think, like, where is the office based, or what are the benefits? I think it's more of those questions where it makes me think about the answer, and kind of it allows us to have more of that in-depth conversation. So what do you want to know about the company? What's their culture like? What does the interviewer like about the company? What would they change about the company? Interviews are a two-way street. They're just as much an opportunity for you to assess whether the company is right for you, and whether the role is right for you, as it is for us to kind of understand if you're the right person for us. So use the opportunity to find out about the company, what's important to you, and know your worth. Like if you're in this conversation, you're actually, I don't really like the sound of what they're doing, or I don't really like that, you can always kind of step back, and afterwards you might decide it's not for you. That's absolutely fine, but I think you need to be able to probe and ask those questions in order to assess that in the first place. I mean, this is a very kind of anecdotal example, but whilst before I got my role at Expedia, I was interviewing at different companies, and I went into one interview, which was a company in London. It was really small. It was a really small kind of consulting agency, but it was for a recruitment role, and it was going to be a sole recruiter role. And I had an interview with the CEO as kind of the final stage, and it just didn't really give me a very good vibe. We spoke a lot about the company culture. I'd read on Glassdoor, I'd done my research, which would bring me on to point 4. And the reviews on Glassdoor were awful. They were terrible. Like, some of the comments were, working here is like working in a is like working in a mortuary. The CEO is a psycho, that sort of thing. And I actually asked the CEO about it in the interview. I asked him, I was like, have you looked at your Glassdoor pages recently? Because, you know, there's some comments on there that'd be interesting to kind of get your opinion on. And he had no idea about it. And I think it was that point where I was like, this is not the place I want to work. And we had a conversation about it. He was very defensive. He wasn't actually a very nice man. And I walked away from it, and I was like, even if they offer me the job, I'm not going to take it. And they did offer me the job, and I was like, no, thank you. It's not for me. So I think it's ask the questions you want to know, and know kind of what your boundaries are, and know what you're looking for, and don't be afraid to kind of walk away from things. So I think that's why it's really important to think about your questions and kind of think about what's important for you. Which again, it's kind of merged with point 4, is do your research. Why do you want this role? Why this company? Look at a company's social media pages, look at Glassdoor. What are current employees saying? Look at their company values, their mission. How does it resonate with you? A lot of the time when we ask, like, you will always be asked why this company at some point in your interview process. So it's really worth thinking about that and to think, is it just because it's a job? Think beyond that, look beyond the basic and general facts on the careers site. You wouldn't believe how many times kind of I asked this question, someone just reels off a load of facts about OVO, like, oh, it was founded in 2014. I was like, yeah, I know it was founded in 2014, but why do you want to work here? So I think it's just really important to kind of do your research and be able to prove that you have done your research and you genuinely are passionate about this opportunity that you're interviewing for. I think that's the thing that really gets me and makes me excited when I'm interviewing candidates, is people who are able to show that real passion and enthusiasm, and they've kind of gone above and beyond into kind of looking at the company and looking at what we do. Again, a little bit more on practical preparation. I've covered it already and it sounds really basic, but test, if it's a virtual interview, test your connectivity, sit in a really kind of neutral background. The amount of people that we've interviewed where people have been in their car on the phone, and it's more just difficult to kind of hear them properly and kind of have a really good conversation. So if you do have an interview, please set aside time in a space that's kind of distraction free, for both yourself and the interviewer. It makes it a lot kind of it makes the conversation a lot easier to kind of go through. Remember, we can still see people. I think the amount of times I've rocked up on interviews sometimes and they've been virtual and people have been in their pajamas or they've been lying in bed, you're like, no, we can still see you. So treat it like it is going to be an actual interview. Treat it as if you were in the office. Make sure you kind of engage. Don't just kind of start staring off into space and turning off, because again, we want people who are kind of engaged in the process and engaged in the conversation. You know, don't be afraid to use hands and gestures and things, and really feel like you're speaking to someone one-on-one. Close any unnecessary tabs, just avoid that distraction piece. When it comes to kind of in-person interviews, just be prepared, make sure you know where you're going, make sure kind of you thought about your transport options, that sort of thing. If you have questions about anything, just ask. Again, the recruiter there, we're there to help you. We want you to perform your best. If you don't know what you should wear if you're going into the office, then just ask. If you don't necessarily know where the office is, if you've had a look but you're like, oh, actually I don't know exactly where I can go, then just ask the question. Nobody's gonna shoot you down for that. We want to set you up for success and we want you to do well. Like, we spend a lot of time and effort, and I mean, that is our job. We spend a lot of time and effort talking to candidates, getting them prepped, getting them to go to interviews. We want it to go well. We want you to, if you got to the interview stage, we want you to join our team. So we're there to help you. So don't be afraid to ask questions. So when it comes to an actual interview and kind of prepping for things, take a step back and think about yourself. What are the kind of key requirements and qualities for the role you're applying for? Look at the job description. What are kind of the key points? You know, when you scroll down and there'll be a section which is like either called what we're looking for or required experience, take a note of that. what are they looking for? Are they looking for someone who's a really strong communicator and really organized? Great. Have a think about that. When have you been able to show that in your career? What are the key achievements you've had? What are the highlights you've had which relate to this sort of thing? Whether it's work, volunteering, education, it doesn't matter. Recently, it was a couple of months ago, we ran an energy graduate scheme, and a lot of the people I interviewed there, they hadn't necessarily had a lot of kind of corporate work experience. Some of them hadn't had any work experience, but the people who were successful were able to draw on really great examples that they'd had volunteering at university or kind of working in projects at school and that sort of thing. So it's always worth looking at a job description, sitting down and thinking, what are these people looking for and what have I done that relates to that? And think of different examples. It's always more interesting for an interviewer if you're able to draw on different things and not just kind of go back to the same experience all the time. And again, have you done an interview previously? Have you had feedback? If you haven't had feedback from an interview, go back to that company, ask for feedback and say, hey, I'm going to another interview. It'd be great to get some more feedback on what I could have done better. What did I do well? That sort of thing. So that's just kind of a little few tips on how to prepare. So when it comes to kind of common interview questions, these are probably 6 that I am 99.9% sure you will be asked at some point in your interview process. So you'll always have kind of, tell me about yourself. That's normally the way we're going to kick off a conversation. We don't necessarily want to launch him with a hardcore competency question. It will be, tell me about yourself, talk me through your CV, that sort of thing. With these sorts of answers, would always recommend them being as kind of snippy as possible. Keep it concise, keep it clear, but kind of bring out any key points which are relevant to the role you're applying for. Again, why are you looking to move on from your current role? What about this role or a company interests you? You will always be asked that. More often than not, people will touch in a way on like, what are your strengths? What are your development areas? And again, any questions for us? So these are kind of key 6 questions you should probably always have in your back pocket when it comes to interviewing. And I'm aware I'm talking quite a bit here, but hopefully I'm going to rattle through the next few slides and we can kind of wrap it up. But here are some example questions that we used in our energy graduate scheme a couple of months ago. These are more competency-based questions where we would look for people to give us specific examples of experience they've had. And for us, these are questions which reflect our values at OVO. So we've got to focus on belonging. Building a really inclusive, diverse workplace is important for us. So one of the things we wanted to focus on is, you know, what benefits have you gained from collaborating with individuals from diverse backgrounds and experiences, and what kind of contributes to building a successful and strong working relationship. And then we've got 3 more questions which are kind of based on our values as a company. So it's always worthwhile looking at companies. What are their values? And you kind of then use that to shape kind of what they might ask you. Again, look at the requirements for the role. If it talks about communication, if it talks about organization, if it talks about stakeholder management, you can guarantee that those are the kinds of questions they're going to ask. They're probably going to ask you things like, when did you deal with a difficult stakeholder? Like, tell me about a time you've dealt with somebody who maybe doesn't see eye to eye with you initially, or when you've worked with someone you haven't worked with before, that sort of thing. In terms of answering those competency questions, I think one of the things that I always often see people downfall on is kind of waffling far too much on these sorts of answers and not getting to the crux of it quick enough, or not necessarily giving enough detail for us to understand how much relevant experience they've got. And because they haven't been able to give that detail, it then kind of makes the hiring manager think, oh, maybe they haven't had as much experience as they said they have. So it's a bit old school, but this is actually a really kind of useful method on how to remember on answering a competency question. So a competency question is a question where it's like, give as an example of, tell us about a time when. So when someone is looking for something specific, but this method, the STAR method, helps you answer it in a really clear and concise way. If you get asked this kind of question and you're thinking STAR, 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 which is situation, task, action, and result, don't launch into, oh, the situation was this, the task was this. I was in an interview like that once, and it was not great, and it just felt very kind of forced and not necessarily as natural or engaging as it could have been. So just have a think, and situation, task, action, result. Quickly set the scene, provide a brief background to the example you're giving, like what was the situation, what's brought this about, what did you have to achieve, what was the task at hand, what was the objective, Action, describe in detail what you did. Focus on the I. Like, a lot of the time people will say we and that sort of thing, but this is about you. Like, sell yourself, say I. What was your involvement? Kind of what skills did you use? That sort of thing. And then it's the result. What was the outcome? What did you achieve? Kind of, would you have done anything differently? And I think with the time of interviews, they're kind of 45 to 90 minutes. A lot of the time, an initial interview will probably be kind of around the 45-minute mark. You'll be surprised how quickly 45-minute goes. You'll probably only be asked kind of 3 or 4 competency-based questions, and then the rest of the time will probably be more general things like why OVO, or why the company, like any questions for us, tell me about yourself, like tell us about your CV, kind of talk me through that, why are you looking to leave? So there'll probably only ever be kind of 3 or 4 types of these questions in there. And then we at OVO, kind of as a talent acquisition team, we support with a lot of interviews, and we wouldn't necessarily ask competency questions. I ask kind of much more holistic questions, and I can get onto that in a second. So making a positive impression. So this is really key things. I've clearly got into the gifts recently, and we got Bart Simpson on there sending good vibes, but be positive, be enthusiastic, and be honest. It's very clear when someone's not necessarily being kind of very transparent in an interview, but I guess there's a fine line between being transparent but speaking negatively. So being honest and being too honest. I've had times when people have sworn in interviews, and people have really kind of been very negative and bad-mouthed managers and previous employers, and that is just a turn off, to be honest. You can be honest, but you can always try and frame things positively. So if you feel bored in your current role and you're like, yeah, this is really boring, I don't want to do this anymore, why don't you frame it as, oh, I'm looking to leave because I need an opportunity that's a new challenge, I need to stretch myself, that sort of thing. Be aware of your body language, both in person and virtually. We can still see you, so body language is really important. And I think I won't try and remember the fact, but I think, and I won't try and remember the number because I'll probably get this wrong, but a large amount of kind of making an impression is down to body language, and it's really important. So keep as much eye contact as you can, smile, and appear as engaged as possible. As I said, kind of don't waffle, speak clearly, coherently, stay relevant. I think a lot of people can get into a trap of going off on a tangent, and you get kind of sucked into your answer, and you start kind of, oh, this bit's relevant to the story, but actually it isn't. So make sure you keep on track as possible, and you can use the STAR method, as I mentioned before, to kind of help guide you when it comes to these competency-based questions. If you're unsure, just ask the questions. No one will kind of mark you down or kind of think negatively of you if you're like, oh, can you just repeat that, please? Like, or I'm not quite sure I understand, like, can you reword that in a different way? And any kind of understanding interviewer or hiring manager will be able to kind of switch and kind of make things more understandable if you haven't understood the question. So don't be afraid to do that, because again, we want to get the best out of you. We don't want to trip you up, we don't want to trick you. We want you to be able to answer the question as to your best of your ability. So if you don't understand how we've worded it, maybe we've said it in a particular way that you don't necessarily understand, and that's absolutely fine. So always just ask the question. Listen carefully and take your time. If you need a minute to answer a question or think of an answer, that's absolutely fine. Again, just be like, oh, sorry, can I just have a think about that? I had someone do it in an interview the other day, and I was like, absolutely, yeah, no problem. And then they came back with a brilliant answer. So yeah, not expecting you to kind of know things on the spot. We want you to perform at your best. So do take your time if you need to. Thank you, Shuri. I am wrapping up. I didn't know if that was kind of a hint of need to kind of hurry up on things. This is my last slide, I promise. So these are kind of my go-to asks. Again, as I said before, like in our role as kind of talent acquisition, if we're supporting on interviews, we wouldn't necessarily do the competency piece, because at the end of the day, I don't know what's going to make an expert kind of Salesforce engineer. That's not what my bag is. I'm about kind of the culture piece and kind of OVO and that sort of thing. So these are some of my favorite questions. I think my go-to question is going to be the culture piece. So what sort of company culture really brings out the best in you? What helps you thrive? And often I've had people answer kind of, if they hate change, they hate the fast pace, like, oh, I really like kind of I like things to be regimented, I don't like things when they change last minute, that sort of thing. Maybe OVO is not the best place, because things always change at OVO. It can be very chaotic at times, and I really like the culture questions. And asking people what they enjoy and what environment they thrive in really kind of brings out what's important to them. And often we can kind of get to a point where we're having a really good conversation. It's a really nice segue for me to be like, oh, I love that you said that, because that's what it's like at OVO. So that's probably one of my favorite questions to ask. I like asking things like, what's the biggest risk you've taken, or what's the hardest decision you've made, because it helps people think. And I think it's one of those things where people aren't always expecting them, and it kind of takes it away from you thinking about the job, and it's more you think about yourself as a person. So they're kind of more holistic in that approach. And I think a lot of companies are kind of moving towards more of this kind of cultural holistic style. So it's always worth kind of thinking of some of these key things as well. And again, what's the biggest highlight in your career? What's something you're really proud of? Is another one that I really like to ask as well. So that's just a snippet of my go-to asks. And in the role play later, I might ask some of these, because these are some of my favorite questions. So that is everything from me, and I'm aware that's probably gone over. I thought I would stay under, but I clearly like to talk far too much. So I'm happy to take any questions now. What I will say is one of the questions that Shure mentioned comes up quite often, so I don't know if this is going to come up now, but one of the questions Shure mentioned comes up quite a bit is around visas and sponsorship. So the Home Office brought in a new rule kind of in April this year, where there is a minimum salary that an individual needs to earn in order to be sponsored by a business on a skilled worker visa, and that salary is 38,700, which I'm aware makes it really tricky, because if people need sponsorship, and if you want to go for grad schemes and that sort of thing, not many grad schemes pay 38,700. So that's kind of one thing that not just as OVO, but that's a rule that the Home Office brought in that kind of a lot of companies will be tied to. So that's just one to be aware of when it comes to applying to businesses and applying to roles. So that's kind of the sponsorship piece. But what I'll do is stop sharing. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Jodie. I feel like your presentation was so insightful. As someone who is like on a grad scheme, you were talking and I was remembering my personal experience. I had an interview and it was a case interview, but if I had asked to prepare, I'm sure I'll have done so much better. And in terms of like the competency versus the technical questions, when we showed some of the stats, we talked about how only 2% make it to that interview point. At the end of the day, most of you are already quite technical. So that's the opportunity for them to have an understanding of how you will thrive in the company and working with you, and what working with you will be like. So really awesome insights, I think. We have two people that have questions. I am going to restrict it to those two. I don't know if we have some more in the chat. Not at the moment, but if you do have more questions, there might be some more time at the end of the session. And if there's not more time, you can always email us. I'll provide our email at the end of the session. We can share them with Jodie or attend to them in-house, their resources to help. I see one more person snuck their hand up. So I'm going to let the first two people go. If your question is quite similar to theirs, then hopefully they've answered it. So I'm going to go with Christabel first. If you could just unmute, ask your question, please keep it as brief as you can. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have two questions, actually. One is on the fact that most companies have employed AI in their recruitment process. So can you give a few tips on how to, I guess, pass the AI test with a CV? And secondly, do you have any tips on how to get comfortable, especially for people who are very anxious in interviews? Any tips on how to get comfortable during interviews so you can give off your best? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Two really great questions. The first one around AI is a really interesting point, because I think we ourselves on the other side of the fence, we're finding people use AI a lot more for their applications and their CVs. And we've got to a point now where actually we put on some responses that, please don't necessarily use things like ChatGPT, because we want to hear from you. We don't want to hear from a robot. And it is so clear when people use it. So it's really interesting. And at OVO, we don't use AI. We don't use like robots to do our CV screening and stuff. But I think to get past the companies that would, I think it's again about looking at the job description, looking at your CV and picking out keywords. So if they've got things like, I don't know, growth, sales growth or whatever, make sure you put that in your CV somewhere, or optimization. I mean, I'm sure there are tools out there, and it might be ChatGPT. I'm sure you could put like a job ad in and be like, give me the key skills for this job, and then it will probably give you a list, and then you could put them in your CV. So it's, I mean, I haven't tried it, but I'm sure that's what it can be used for. So it's kind of being able to, I guess, use it to your advantage. So with companies who use AI to screen CVs, it would always be based on keywords. And we do have a system now, actually. We have it where they've added it where I can filter by keywords, but I'm still a bit apprehensive to do it. I don't know if I'm just a bit old school, but I keep going back to my Salesforce role because I literally just did this before the call, but I could easily filter in there Salesforce, and there were 20 applications from people who hadn't put Salesforce in their CV at all. So I know that those roles aren't right, so I can easily reject those. So it's about looking at the job ad, picking out the keywords, but I reckon you could get ChatGPT to do that for you very easily, and then make sure those are shown in your application, in your CV. And then the other point you made around kind of anxiety and interviews, I totally agree. I mean, I haven't had an interview now for, well, 5 years, and I think it would induce a lot of anxiety in me if I have to do it. So I think it's about kind of, again, in the reasonable adjustments, you can kind of put that. If you are somebody who suffers from anxiety, say like, I suffer from anxiety, I need to, whatever adjustments you need to kind of make yourself feel better, you can be honest about that and clear about that. One of the things that we're hoping to trial in our team, which I hope we're going to launch soon at some point, is providing interview questions before people come, because I think not knowing, and I think we've already touched on it, not knowing what you're going to be asked, as you said, that can be kind of very scary. But we don't want to trip you up. Like if you're somebody who maybe can't think on the spot very quickly, but you've got brilliant experience, if we share the questions ahead of time, then hopefully you're able to draw on that, and kind of you're then able to perform at your best and kind of have that. So I mean, bringing that in and being able to share interview questions before, I think it's something that we're going to have to work really hard with our hiring managers on, because I don't think everyone's on board straight off the bat. I think they're like, oh, it gives people an unfair advantage, or we're not then like, how are we then going to get the best out of people? But it's like, well, surely we will get the best out of people if they're all as prepared as possible. So it's really interesting, and I think a lot of companies are going to start going that way. But when it comes to kind of, I guess, being less nervous and kind of calming yourself, I think it's also remembering that this is a two-way street. Like, is this right for you as much as it's kind of right for them or right for the company? And kind of when I was interviewing at OVO, I felt so comfortable. I felt really comfortable with my interviewers. They made it a very comfortable experience. And I think because of that, because I knew it wasn't going to be like an interrogation, it was very much framed as, we're just going to have a chat. I was like, actually, that's not as scary. And because I've been through experiences where I've walked away from a job and I thought, actually, I really don't like that company I've worked with, I've realized like this is as much an opportunity for me to learn. And I think that kind of takes the anxiety out a bit, because you're like, actually, I know my worth. I know what I'm about. If they don't like me, that's okay. I'll find someone who does. So yeah, I don't know that's a useful tip, but that's kind of how I'd approach it now, I think.
I think it's definitely useful. Thank you, Jodie. Kemi has put her question in the chat, so I'll read it out. Egosa, if you can put in the chat as well, I'm happy to read it out as well. Kemi says, how do I get my CV for a job I love and can perform the job description as advertised, but I don't really have experience to prove this? How can I get my CV selected for an interview? Thank you. I'll take Marvelous Emmanuel's question as well, just because it's really yes or no straightforward, and it's in the chat as well. It says, if your CV is 2 pages and your references spills off, making it 3 pages, should you just take it off? Besides, does references play any roles on a CV? I think the question is yes to references or no to references, and especially in terms of extension. And what's the best format for a CV, if any? Experience first or educational qualities first? I think you take those two, and we'll keep Dada Ayomiko's question. Just pause that.
Okay. If I go to the simple yes or no ones first, so if your CV is 2 pages and your references spill over, I would not worry about putting references on your CV. I think they're really kind of outdated. I mean, if I saw them on there, I wouldn't be contacting the referee. I think at this point, this day and age, references are only contacted when someone's offered a job. and we only contact them to confirm someone's worked there. We never go into the thing of, do you think they'd be good to work to this job? So actually these days, I don't think references are necessary. So you can kind of take that off, save a bit of space. And in terms of best format for a CV, I think the key things would be, if your education is relevant, like if you're, I don't know, if you're applying for like a kind of mechanical engineer job and you've done a mechanical engineering degree, then I definitely put it at the top. I think if you're like me, you went to university, did a degree that you're not using at all now, then I wouldn't necessarily put it at the top, unless you could just put it in a really small kind of part. And I think definitely experience is probably what I would put above education, unless you can put your education into really small. I mean, I'm just thinking of my own CV. I've got it, I say this now, I've got it at the top, but it's literally like university, A-levels, GCSEs, like and I probably shouldn't even have the GCSEs in there, to be honest, because it's not really relevant, and that was like 15 years ago. So yeah, I'd prioritize experience over education unless the education is relevant. These days, to be honest, I don't necessarily look at people's education when I'm reviewing a CV, because more often than not, it's not necessarily relevant. I mean, I don't really care if you got an A star at maths, GCSE. It doesn't. If you're applying to a customer service advisor role, it doesn't really make a difference to me. Then the other question was from Kemi around CV for a job you love that you don't necessarily have proven experience in. That's a really interesting question, and it's that age-old one, especially if you're in a graduate position. And I found it when I was applying to graduate roles and things, whereas you need X amount of experience to get this job, but you can't, because you've literally just come out of university or you've just come out of education, and you're like, well, you need X amount of experience to get a job that is an entry-level job. So it's like, well, how do I even get it? So I think in this situation, a lot of it would be around kind of engaging with people, speak to the teams. If you are able to see on the company, on the role, like we put our hiring managers' names on the job descriptions, or if you can figure out on LinkedIn like who's hiring for the role, or the recruiters in the company, it's always worth sending them a message and be like, look, I've seen this job. I've got this experience. I know it's not kind of matching, but I'm really passionate about this job because of X, Y, Z. And I think if I had messages like that, then I would I'd hopefully get back to everyone. I mean, we do get a lot of messages, but if someone's able to prove kind of how passionate they are, or kind of how interested they are in a role in a company, then you can always have a conversation, and even if it's just a conversation with the recruiter or the hiring manager, for them to give you more advice and be like, maybe not now, but maybe in the future, but this is what we'd suggest you kind of get some experience in before you apply when the role comes up again. And that's the way to kind of go about it. And again, to kind of get through CV sifting, it's about picking out those kind of key skills, and you can put in a cover letter, look, I know I don't have this experience, but this experience I've got from doing this is really transferable. So I think it's just about kind of selling yourself as much as possible, really, and kind of showing your passion, showing your enthusiasm, but showing where you might have transferable skills if you don't necessarily have the exact experience required. I think that answers the question.
Yeah, I think you did. I'm going to take Egos's question, because I think he or she might have had their hand up and put it down to put in the chat. I'm going to just park the rest of the questions. We should have some other time after the role play to take more questions. And whatever we cannot answer on this live session, we'll definitely be in touch via emails. And I'll share the emails, the email addresses you can email, or the email address you can email, and then we should be able to provide you some information. Egos's question is, what is your advice for people that don't have UK experience? What can they do to get the job? Because I see lots of recruiters are keen on UK experience. I think the first thing is I need to debunk, are recruiters really keen on UK experience? And if they are, what is your advice for people that don't have it?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I mean, a really kind of cop-out answer from me is that it depends entirely on the role, I think. So so I mean, for example, one of the roles that we're kind of always hiring for at OVO is our customer service roles. So we call them zero carbon living advisors. They're the people who are on the phones to the customers, and they're solving their problems. They're helping them kind of recommend ways to decarbonize their home, that sort of thing. And we are hiring a lot of people who don't have any UK experience. So we've got lots of people there, but because they're able to show that they've had customer service experience in their home countries. Whereas I think I'm trying to think of examples of where we would kind of really need UK specific experience. I mean, in some roles where I've hired before, where it's maybe finance roles, and they need to kind of know the UK market and kind of UK banking and the Financial Conduct Authority and that sort of thing. Some hiring managers might be more inclined to kind of have that specific previous experience in the UK, because that's something they need to kind of hit the ground running, and not necessarily something that they want people, especially if it's a senior role, that they can afford for someone to kind of come in and get to grips with whilst they're on the job. Whereas I think other than that, I think it's entirely role dependent. And I think as long as you're able to kind of showcase the skills required, I would hope that there wouldn't be people who are like, oh, well, you don't have that experience in the UK. But I think it entirely depends on the company and the role you're applying for. So yeah, I mean, that's not, it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think it's just dependent on each individual situation, to be honest.
Thank you, Jodie. I think it's a pretty good understanding as to how some of those decisions are made, and hopefully provides the asker with some clarity that they might need as to why UK experience for some specific roles. I'm gonna then quickly move to the role play, just because I want us to stick to time, and I want to honor everyone's time on this live session. So I'm going to give one person the opportunity. I know, Kemi, your hand is up, but you have to put your hand down. The first person to just put their hand up, we're going to do a live role play with just an interview session, 5 to 7 minutes. You probably be asked 1 or 2 questions, or some questions that I know Jodie might have put aside. Any takers? Anybody interested? I just need one person only, but you have to obviously be somewhere that is not noisy. Any takers for live role play? Oh, okay. Anyone? Okay.
Don't worry if you don't. I'm not that scary, but
no, I think it's also it's like, even as a demo, it's still quite scary.
Yeah, it is scary. I mean, I wouldn't be putting my hand up, to be honest.
Oh, we have one person. Great. Yeah, opportunity to get a role with the
well, there you go.
Live, job interview demo with someone that works at OVO and recruits lots of people. We have Eniola. If you can go ahead and unmute. I'm gonna just go off mute once I hear you're on here. Hi, are you here?
Hello.
Perfect. Great. You sound ready already. Love it.
I really wish.
Yeah.
Hi, Eniola. I'll start with an easy one. I mean, I say tell us about yourself because all of us are here. All 67 of us are here to listen. But yeah, if you just want to tell us about yourself, talk us through kind of your experience and your CV to start off with.
Hi, Jodie. Thank you for inviting me to this interview. I'm so delighted to be here. I have a master's degree from the University of Nottingham in Energy Development and Policy Analysis, and I'm currently working on my advanced project management certification. Over the past few years, I've worked in deploying low carbon energy solution projects where currently where I work as a commercial analyst, leading and managing bid processes from various types of bids to research and development, engineering, visibility, and other large deployment solutions for many partners like local councils, corporate organizations, and as well as innovative fund for the government. I am someone on a casual day who you will see walking in a park to enjoy nature or having lunch or dinner after work. I'm happy to be interviewed by your organization because I believe you are people who are proactive about change and people who want to see the environment prosper. And that's why I have applied for this role.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And when it comes to your kind of current work, what do you enjoy most? What's kind of your favorite part of your role?
I think on a daily basis, I would enjoy doing stakeholder management, bid coordination, and policy analysis, where I tend to look into details of what the government wants to do in the area of net zero and how to, further push it ahead.
Yeah, no, amazing. And is there anything you maybe don't enjoy as much, or anything you find a bit more frustrating or challenging at times?
Oh, I just think for me, as someone who works with interfacing my business with government, the major challenge is the snail pace of doing things and just keep giving promises and targets, and we are not reaching or meeting them.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And you mentioned before kind of stakeholder management was one of the things that you really enjoy. Who are some of the key stakeholders that you work with at the moment?
I've worked across a couple of stakeholders for different energy solutions like hydrogen for the Department for Energy Net Zero, Energy Security and Net Zero, the Department for Fuel and Transport, yes, and other local councils around where I live in Birmingham.
No, perfect. And when it comes to kind of managing them, have you had any instances, or can you tell me about a time where maybe you've not been on the same page and you've had to kind of go about getting buy-in from your stakeholders and kind of getting on the same page as them?
A quick example I could think of right now was prioritizing waste solutions for local councils. So because as at the time we were trying to lead an advocacy campaign of how they could utilize their waste for other sources to make other energy vectors, they were having other contracting commitment to other big waste companies. So having to convince them and getting them to look at our solution against what their commitments were, even though they could, provide the solution and not think of the revenue they could gain, it was a bit dicey. But with continuous engagement and interaction, and also looking to what the community wanted, we were able to, convince them to look at the solution we're providing.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I think it's always, like you said, it's always great to kind of get data or research from elsewhere, and kind of, I guess, proof is in the pudding. And if that's what the community want, as you've said, then it probably kind of made them kind of see the value in what you're doing. No, brilliant. And when it comes to your kind of career or even your education, what has been a real kind of highlight for you? What's been a real proud moment, or it doesn't need to be anything really big, it could just be something that you're really proud of, but what's been a highlight?
For me, career-wise, my very big highlight was being able to support my current company to win an innovative grant fund that was able to move our process further.
Yeah, amazing. What was the grant for?
It was for a fuel switching process for a pulp and paper company. They needed to convert the usage of natural gas into use waste from their paper production, to get other substitutes for natural gas. So the technology we were presenting to them was to make a syngas which had a viable carbon reduction assessment compared to using natural gas in their production. So that was what the fun was.
Amazing. I mean, I can stop it there because that goes way over my head and my.
This is absolutely wonderful.
Very knowledgeable.
I'm like, I heard her speak. I'm like, what's your LinkedIn? I want to be friends.
Yeah, you're hired.
Hired, literally. Job, and you weren't even prepared.
Thank you, guys.
Oh my god! Oh my god! No, this is absolutely amazing. I don't know if you have any feedback, Jodie, for Eniola, or for things she said that you want to re-highlight how important those things were, just as a lesson, and then we can move to Tim.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was great, Ayola, honestly, especially as I put you in the spot. And there was a point where I was like, oh, do I ask my next question or is that too harsh? But you answered it really well. So, and like with the detail you gave and kind of the last question when I asked around the highlight and asking when I asked around the grant, it was clear that you know what you're talking about. Like, and I literally have no idea what you're talking about, but the way you explained it kind of gave me an understanding. And I think that's the thing. And a lot of the time in our roles as recruiters, I'm not an expert in a lot of the roles I hire for, but when someone is able to help me understand what they do and kind of put it into those kind of layman's simple terms, then that's what I really appreciate about a candidate, is if they're able to kind of play things back to me, help me understand when I've had no prior understanding of something. So that was really great. And again, kind of your answer to the stakeholder piece, it was very clear, put you on the spot, but it was great. I think the only thing was in the first question when I asked you, like, tell me about yourself. And to be fair, it's a very open-ended question, but I do see like a fair few people fall into this trap, is when I ask it, it's like, oh, just talk me through your CV or tell me about yourself. Is people will do that, which is great. And then they might go on to tell me a bit around, as you said, like why you might want the role. And I think there was something else you said, but I can't remember what it was. But when people kind of go off track from a question a little bit, it makes me think, and particularly when I'm doing phone interviews, it makes me think they're kind of just reading off a script and they're like, oh, I've written all of this stuff I've prepared and I'm just gonna speak. So it didn't necessarily sound like that you said at the moment, but what you kind of, and the question I asked, to be fair, as I said, was quite open-ended, and you answered it in a way that I would answer it as well. But I think it just prompted me in my mind that I've had questions before where I've asked, tell me about your current role, and then someone will go in and they'll say, my current role, I'm working at Burger King and I'm really great at that role. I've got really good strengths because I like customer service, and I like customer service because I like helping people, and I like helping people because I solve problems, and I do that. And then it kind of, when someone goes like that far off tangent to the question I've asked, I'm like, have you prepared? Which is great, but are you just reading all your answer at me? And it makes it sometimes seem that people weren't like the person didn't necessarily listen to my question. And I think that's where a lot of people can fall down, especially in those initial stages, is because they want to sell themselves, they want to show the best of them, and they've prepared this really great answer, and they've kind of put all of their answers and they've written these notes, and they just want to make sure they get everything out there, which is great. But it's always about picking the right opportunity to bring that. And more often than not, you will be asked at some point in the interview, like, why do you want the role? Why do you think you'd be good at this role? What are your development areas? So I guess it's about saving that sort of thing. And I mean, you didn't necessarily kind of focus on that, Anila. Like, there was just one small bit where you said about kind of why you wanted to work here, which probably would have come in a later question. So your answer was great, but it just made me think, like, actually one of the pitfalls I see with a lot of other people is they would then kind of build on it too far and then go completely away from the question I've asked. So that's just one for everyone to kind of be aware of, is make sure you're sticking to the question. And if you've written some notes to prepare, then more often than not, particularly around like your strengths and why you want to work somewhere, that question will come up at some point.
Thank you so much, Jodie. Thank you, Eniola. I think Jodie has been absolutely fantastic. We can definitely give her virtual claps. You spent so much time with us, just providing us with so much value, so much inside information. And a big thank you to Eniola for just being confident and being bold to just try this out. Thank you for providing so much insight. Thank you, Jodie. We're going to quickly move over to Tim. Tim is currently has a job at SSE. I believe he was on their grad scheme, so he can provide us inside relevant information from somebody who was interviewed. So we've talked to someone who interviews people, and now we have Tim, who was on the other side, and he was able to get the job and succeed at his job. So Tim, if you could maybe speak about your experience, some tips that you have, and then we can bring the session to a close. Tim? Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Kome. Thank you, Jodie. That was really insightful. I was trying to play back 2 years. Like, I wish I had something this insightful as well. And then that was very brilliant. So for me, my name is Tim. I currently work with SSC on the grad scheme and the renewable energy side of things. And 2 years ago, I was applying before I got into the job. And for the grad scheme, I think when you get into the interview side, is like assessment centers where you have to do 3 different activities. You're gonna go through a group discussion where you're meeting totally like different candidates, and it could be intimidating. I mean, I got through about 6 to 7 final stage interview like assessment centers, and the very first one was like, I can remember vividly because I was there when when they told us to introduce ourselves, and somebody was saying, "I'm from MIT." I was like, "Oh my god, what am I doing here?" And it was like really intimidating for me. Like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing here, and you need to hear like people talking about themselves, and I'm not used to that. I mean, talking about myself and all. So, but eventually, like after the first one, I got more confident. And I think second activity on the assessment center is like a presentation. You get like a brief and then you make a presentation. And then the third activity is like the proper interview. That interview can, I think for different ones I did, what I noticed and in hindsight is the level of technicality increased based on the candidates. So I think based on what I mean from the first one, based on the way people were introducing themselves and saying great stuff about themselves, I think they must have upped the standard of question they were giving us, because it wasn't just, I mean, I saw other companies and I was like, okay, these people were like, maybe because of the level of dexterity we're showing, I mean, all the candidates were trying to show like, I need to get this job. And so, yeah, I mean, my takeaway from all of the assessment centers and interviews, I mean, and judging from the eventual company I work for is, I think the confidence is more important, and how you present all your thought process and all of that is, because eventually they're not looking out for competence, they're looking out for how you display that you can fit into the company's culture and the team you'll be working. How do you fit in? Because I remember really, and for this is funny because yesterday I had a chat with my line manager who was on the interview team for me, and he would always say like from the first 2 minutes, it was like, this is the guy we wanted. Like I was making a presentation to him and I was talking like I was already in the company. So I wasn't talking from outside. I was talking like, I mean, I've gone to a lot of preps and all. I've watched some guys on YouTube and how to ace interviews and all of that. And then it was like, and one of the things he said, it was like, when you get in, you're going to see how this really happens. And I was like, okay, is that a cue? Like, I've gotten the job already. And he had to like correct himself, like, if you get in. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting. And we had even the chat yesterday about something and somebody we're trying to like work with. And it was like, Tim, don't forget the first rule of principle is like, when you get there, speak like we're in a relationship with these people. And don't be scared. Go with your confidence. And I mean, I was just looking back, like, I mean, that was the first thing like he saw, and it was like he was adamant, like, I want this person on the team, and I've been working with him. He's been very nice. So I think go with your confidence, go with into all the interviews. I mean, seeing Jodie taking a sip of water now is like they ask you some questions, go with a glass of water, drink. When you don't, I mean, I remember there was one I was on, and they asked me a question, and to be fair, like I froze, like my brain was like totally off, like, and then I was like, "Please, can I take water?" And they're like, "Oh, feel free." In that 30 seconds of having the water, I was browsing through, okay, what answer can I give? And by the time I was done, I was like, can you repeat the question again? I was still trying to, buy time to, what am I going to say? Yeah. And yeah, by the time they will repeat it. And I mean, I was candid, like, I have a bit of knowledge about this, but I will just give it a try. And by the time I started giving it a try, I mean, they were candid, and they were like, okay, you have, I mean, the body language was giving. Okay, they were nodding at. I was like, okay, maybe I'm saying the right thing. And eventually they were like, okay, you got it to this point. And at this point, when we knew like, okay, you're not so sure. And by the time I finished and they told me to ask questions, I went back to that question. So like, wait, can you explain it properly to me? And the lady was like, that's really impressive. I mean, I remember that because I think that's one of the feedback I got as well. Like I was candid about it. Like it was like I was really pressing genuinely for proper feedback to know about it. And then by the time she gave me the answer, and then I pressed further to be like, okay, what's your company's role with this policy? And are you part of that team? And then she went, okay, I shouldn't be answering this question. The next person should be answering this question because he's the head of that department. And that was how like it almost like felt like it wasn't like an interview, more like just people just having normal conversations. And I think I took a lot of lessons from that particular interview, from that particular assessment center, and moving on to the other ones. It was just like picking up the lessons and all. And another thing I would say is sometimes you might not just be good for a team, and it's not just what's going in there. So no matter, I mean, you must have done your, research about the company, the role, the management style they have there and all. But sometimes you can't force it if it's not just it. You know, if you feel the energy is not just right, you don't want to, eat yourself so hard, because I feel like I was in that stage where I was like, why am I not getting the roles? Blah blah blah. Especially when I was looking for, entry level roles, and I didn't have any experience in the UK, and but eventually I came to realize, like, okay, if I'd gotten this role, actually, I would have struggled, because I was coming from an architectural background into energy, and I would have struggled a lot with some things. But where I am now is like, I can bring in some of my skills, transfer it there, and then it's just me like pushing myself to like know the technical bit more. And then you see like, okay, people are ready to like support you and all. Meanwhile, in some other places where people will now work in those places, and like the support is not as great as where I am. So sometimes don't beat yourself too hard. Just give it your best shot, and I wish you the very best. All right, Kome, thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Oh my God, Tim gave such great advice. You know what, Tim, as you were speaking, I remembered my graduate assessment center. Same things. The person that interviewed me is currently my work mentor. So it almost felt like they were using that opportunity to see who will work best in the team, who they would like to mentor, and things like that. Even with questions I didn't understand, I was honest. I remember it was about sustainable aviation fuels. I was like, I'm not quite sure about this, and what is the company doing? And they explained. So it's quite interesting to see the parallels between our assessment centers, quite similar, I'll be honest. And for everyone looking for a grad scheme here, I don't know if Tim talked about, I think he did. They didn't ask any technical questions, because if they're looking for technical people, they would not be searching in a grad scheme. So they were very much looking for people who can join the company, it will infuse well with the company culture. So understanding the company culture is key and very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Tim's tip about, if you don't know, drink some water, that's a hack. I actually know that. What I do is I always say, that's a great question. I haven't thought about it. But now that you say it, all of this is to buy time. Well, the water glass is the ultimate hack on this call. But yeah, with that, we're gonna end because it's almost 6:30. Thank you so much for your insights, Tim. I'm sure if you could pull that slide up. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. Reach out to us on X, on LinkedIn, thank you, Shori, on Instagram. We want to connect with you. We want to know about you. We have lots of sessions like this. We've had a data analysis one that just happened recently. So do join the community moving forward. And with that, I think we can end, right? Thank you so much, except if you have anything to add, Shori. But thank you to all 79 people on this call. There were 79 people at one time. Thank you all so much. Have a good evening. Bye, everyone.